Back. Well, the 2016 local elections left the ANC with just 49% of the vote in Ekurhuleni's council, but a combination of 4 seats from the African Independence Congress managed to take them over the 51% needed to lead a coalition-run council. Makes it one of the few relatively stable coalitions in metros in South Africa. Pascal Moloi is a local government election expert. We managed to bend his arm, which wasn't made of rubber, we discovered, to have him back in our studios. Now, Pascal, good evening. I'm glad you were able to make the time. Thanks very much indeed. The situation in Ekurhuleni is so fascinating because it's an ANC council governing in a coalition with the AIC, and from what everyone says, and the Auditor General's office seems to confirm this, it's a coalition that's worked.
Well, it looks like, yes. I mean, it's the only, well, amongst the metros, the one coalition that has survived the full term, compared to Johannesburg and Tshwane and PE. Yeah, I think maybe it's maybe a further up a bit for coalition governments that we could learn from Ekurhuleni and see how they did it.
So, I mean, and I know that Mzwandile Masina's actually written a book on this subject based on his experience on coalitions, but is it easy to say this coalition worked because the AIC allowed it to work? It was a pretty simple coalition, really. 2 major parties. The ANC needed the AIC. They only had a small proportion of the vote. And because it was simple, is that what made it happen?
I think there was also the PAC in the mix. And the PAC, I think, got 2% of the votes, ANC 49%. And the AIC got only 1%. So, yeah. So I think, yes, we could say that. But a number of observers and commentators have credited Mayor Masina for holding it together. The style of leadership, I'm not sure of the details. But a lot of people that I talk to say that he's held it together.
It's interesting because there's a lesson for small parties going into coalitions with big parties, which is how will voters look at them in the next election? So it's fine in 2016, for argument's sake, as the AIC and the PAC to go into a coalition with the ANC and Ekurhuleni, but your voters may not actually be very pleased with you, or they may be very pleased with you. Do you think there's going to be a sort of judgment now? I mean, the AIC exists primarily to move the provincial boundary around Matatiele. It's an astonishing story. You know, it's a town that's in the Eastern Cape, wants to be in KwaZulu-Natal. The boundary hasn't moved, so you could argue the AIC didn't get what it wanted.
Yeah, you could argue that. But I've been propagating and advocating for transparency and fairness, that the electorate deserves to know what's in the agreement. It shouldn't be just a buddy-buddy agreement behind the closed doors. And in fact, if you do that, then you are able to hold the coalition partners to account. Just as we go out, or the parties go out with their different manifestos, there should be a sort of a coalition manifesto that gets sold to the electorate, and we know how to hold the coalition partners accountable as a collective. It might be led by the ANC or by another party, but I think that collective responsibility to the electorate is important.
There's certain sort of geographic and political features in Ekurhuleni which are fascinating. I mean, like other parts of this country, you have, you know, huge inequality. You have Bedfordview and you have Tembisa sort of in the same place. That must lead to very interesting political dynamics and strongholds.
No, absolutely. I mean, Ekurhuleni is capital of the country in 2 ways. One, it's the informal settlement capital of the country, and 2, it still remains the manufacturing capital of the country. It's interesting you're talking about Tembisa. There's a very interesting dynamic in Tembisa. The collection rate there is about 90%, at least for electricity. Maybe it's because of very strict and very effective credit control measures, but also maybe because they have the highest number of prepaid meters there. But it's also the, how do I put it, the biggest city, Tembisa, outside Limpopo. So, there's a huge Limpopo population there, which brings its own dynamic. Then you have Katoras, you know, the old Katoras, Katlehong, Togoza, and Vosloorus, with huge service delivery challenges. But again, the health system seems to be working. The clinics are working. So Ekurhuleni as a whole, and then you have your Rosefields and your Albertons and Kempton Park. The Aerotropolis idea is a good idea. It's a big idea. And you can see the growth around OR Tambo Airport. So it's a mixed bag of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay. Yeah, I think it bodes well in some instances. Unfortunately, the basics remain challenging and problematic. And the basics for me will be rates, rubbish, and roads, the triple R's. Okay, your electricity, your roads, your potholes, and water provision and all that. Those remain still the challenge. But the other services, corporate services, finance, and all that, they're getting good audit outcomes year on year for the last term. So there is something, I think there is big potential in Ekurhuleni for it to be turned around.
I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, you talk about a 90% connection rate for electricity, people paying for electricity. You don't get that in some parts of Soweto. And at the same time, if I remember correctly, there was a story that Ekurhuleni was accused of not implementing load shedding. Eskom had to take over the schedule. I mean, you have these massive things. You talk about, Tembisi, you talk about a number of people who've come from Limpopo there, and immediately anyone who follows politics closely thinks of one person from Seshego, and I'm thinking of Julius Malema. I mean, that must give him quite a nice head start there.
Well, look, he wasn't there in 2011. He came in at 11% in the 2014 national and provincial elections, and has maintained that 11% in the 2016 elections. So, yes, I think there might be a chance for him to increase his votes. Compared to the DA, that, well, it increased as well from 27% to about 36%, I think, in the 2016 elections. And there was a huge drop, obviously, for the ANC, from 62% to about 49%, as you said in your intro. So, yes, I think Ekurhuleni would be a very interesting place to watch and see how the election results pan out.
Mzondile Masina is such a fascinating political figure. I mean, he's the chair of the region of the ANC for Ekurhuleni. He's the mayor. He is, and I don't think he will contradict me if I say he's a member of the RET faction of the ANC. He tweeted once, I'll never forget, he tweeted once that he preferred the EFF's economic policies to the ANC's, and eventually he had to sort of retract that, or he was smacked down a little bit by Luthuli House. He certainly has a strong constituency in Ekurhuleni. Do you think he comes back as mayor? I mean, in a way, despite the fact that he seems to be almost opposed to the sort of Ramaphosa faction?
Well, if the ANC is true to its mantra about getting qualified people, experienced people, he's got the academic qualifications, he's got the experience now. I think it would be amazing for me that, and he's just had one term. And I believe that, look, the two-term issue, for me, it's a bit, it takes 18 months in my, I mean, not 18 months, a year and 2 years and a half, or maybe 3 years, to turn a city around.
Sure.
You have a 5-year IDP, but you have a long-term plan. Most of the long-term plans are 30 years, 20 years, and all that. And just to be there for 2 terms, it's not enough. But, well, that's what the legislation says and all that. So I think logic for me tells me that he deserves another term.
Pascal Moloi, it's going to be fascinating on election night, I think, Ekurhuleni. Really appreciate the time. Thanks very much.
My pleasure, Stephen.
The local elections expert, Pascal Moloi.